Okay, we have one of the signature premium events of PBS coming up on stage in a moment. It is one of my personal favorites, which is our travel debate on a significant and notable issue facing our industry. Peter, I'm going to be welcoming Peter Labasso in a moment, but I want to read a few things that make me think of Peter, who is the attorney for ASTA. A lawyer is a person that writes a 10,000-word document and calls it a brief. Franz Kafka. It's the trade of lawyers to question everything, yield nothing, and talk and bill by the hour. Good lawyers know the law. Great lawyers know the judge. There are three types of lawyers: able, unable, and lamentable. Let me introduce you to one of the most able attorneys you will ever come across. I don't necessarily think highly of them, but I certainly think very, very highly of this man. He's a good friend of the industry. He's a good friend of myself. Peter Labasso, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Good morning to everyone, and welcome to the first of what we hope will be a series of great debates on important and controversial subjects in the travel industry here at the ASTA Premium Business Summit. Our topic this morning is licensing. More specifically, whether travel advisors should be required to hold a professional license to sell travel. While 4 states currently require travel advisors to register to sell travel, none of the 50 states currently has adopted a licensing regime under which an applicant's competence would be verified through an examination or some similar means before being permitted to do business. Proponents of licensure say that it's needed in order to ensure that consumers only work with knowledgeable, qualified, and skilled advisors, and to protect against fraud while upholding the overall professionalism of the industry. Now, for their part, opponents of licensing question the need for further regulation and cite, among other things, the cost and administrative burden associated with compliance. They also assert that a licensing mandate would not only serve to create a potentially significant barrier to entry that would discourage sorely needed new talent from entering in an already short-staffed industry. And while we do think it will be informative and hopefully entertaining as well, this debate is not a strictly academic exercise, as your views on this critically important subject will help us shape ASTA's positioning on related issues and our advocacy objectives and priorities in the future. And it's for that reason that after you've heard from the participants, we'll be asking you what position you think has more merit and whether what was discussed here this morning has changed any minds. Now, allow me to introduce our participants. Representing the view that an industry-wide licensing mandate is needed is Eric Maryanov. Since 1984, Eric has been the president of All Travel, an ASTA premium member agency based in Los Angeles, with storefront retail locations in Ohio and Arizona. All Travel currently employs 45 people throughout the country. Eric served for 8 years as the chairman of the board of Signature Travel Network and served on ASTA's National Board of Directors from 2015 to 2019, including 1 year as its vice chair and 2 years as its treasurer. He has also served on numerous other travel industry advisory boards, including those of Four Seasons, Club Med, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Additionally, he is the president and facilitator of TAMS, an agency benchmarking consultancy firm with more than 90 member agencies. A published travel columnist, Mr. Maryanov has been in the travel business since 1980. Welcome, Eric. Holding the opposite view, namely that a licensure requirement is both unnecessary and undesirable, is Christopher Dane. Chris has been in the travel industry for 5 decades and is currently the president and managing partner of Hickory Global Partners, a travel management services company. He also serves as executive director and partner of host agency IntelliTravel and is a member of the board of directors of MGME, a meeting, incentive, and corporate event company. Prior to his current roles, Chris served as president of HRG Executive Travel Associates. Mr. Dane also maintains his own consulting company, Unlimited Travel Solutions. Earlier in his career, Chris held senior-level positions in the airline industry with American, Frontier, and Eastern Airlines, and led the largest field division at Sabre, where he was responsible for the sales, service, training, and operational functions. Welcome, Chris. Our debate format this morning is as follows. The questioning will consist of 8 questions posed by me, each focusing on a different aspect of the issue, with 4 questions directed to each participant in an alternating fashion. The person being asked the questions will have 2 minutes to provide an answer. The other participant will then be permitted 1 minute for a reply or rebuttal. Now, to ensure as best possible that we get to all of the questions, we'll be fairly firm with the time limits. But where a follow-up question may be helpful, or where one of the participants makes a statement that we think warrants a response from the other, we'll slightly adjust. Due to our time constraints, we will forego opening statements and proceed directly to the questioning. However, at the conclusion of the questioning period, each side will have 90 seconds for a closing statement, summarizing the strengths of their position and the actual or perceived weaknesses of his opponents. As the proponent of licensing, the first question today goes to Mr. Maryanov. Eric, regardless of our personal views on the proper role of government in general and licensing in particular, I think we can all agree that raising the bar of professionalism in our industry is a laudable goal. That said, there are already numerous ways for advisors to enhance their knowledge and skills to better serve their clients. For example, ASTA has its verified travel advisor certification program, and it holds every member to a strict code of ethics. Host agencies and consortia have their own educational offerings as well. And consumers can avail themselves of myriad federal and state consumer protection laws should they have a problem with an advisor. So in short, Eric, why do you believe the industry needs a licensing requirement?
Thank you, Peter. While those are all excellent programs, there is no mandate that anybody participate in any one of those programs. As Alvin talked about yesterday, while it's an excellent program of ASTA Verified, it's not a requirement for everybody. The issue of licensing really is not so much the people in this room, it's those people that join the industry and immediately say, I'm a travel expert, with no background knowledge or information. And yes, a lot of host agencies have some great educational programs, but it's not required of a host agency to have such a program. Same thing with the consortia. Now, on a consortia level, I think we're seeing a little bit more standardization of the required educational programs, and certain host agencies have a requirement of education within their host. But not all host agencies are required to. Not all agencies are even a part of ASTA. So it's still the requirement and a standardization. The other thing that was very clear is from what Jesse spoke of this morning, we are a very regulated industry already, but there is no benchmark to make sure that everybody's even aware of the regulations and the requirements within the industry or abiding by the laws. So again, I don't think licensing applies nearly so much to the people in this room, or in fact, I'm sure it doesn't. It's the segment of the industry that pops in that doesn't have the level of professionalism, that hasn't put the time and energy even into understanding the laws, the requirements, even for that matter, who the vendors are and what the best options are for their clients.
Thank you, Eric. Chris, I imagine you disagree with some of what you heard there. Your thoughts?
Well, shockingly, I do. This appears to me to be a solution in search of a problem. It is not something that is a problem today en masse. It's going to drive cost. It's going to drive bureaucracy. And I can promise you that anyone in this room who is having difficulty finding or attracting people to this industry or finding qualified people with this proposal, your costs just went up, finding people just got harder for a problem that doesn't exist in Mass. Now, Eric and I, we both have our CTC, and I have my CTIE from the Institute of Travel. And I suspect with Eric, and I can tell you from my perspective for sure, I did it to demonstrate to the people that I was talking to that I was held to a higher level. And I'm pretty pleased with the fact, and I hope Eric would be as well, and absolutely the same applies to the verified travel agent. I would much rather be one of a few than one of everyone, because that really helps you stand out for you and your agents and your business.
Thank you, Chris. Continuing on to the next question, this one is for you, Mr. Dane. As part of the rationale for the rebrand of ASTA as the American Society of Travel Advisors in 2018, we stress that our members are not mere booking agents, but rather skilled professionals who possess specialized knowledge, not unlike lawyers and CPAs. We say we're on par with these other professions that provide consumers with valuable advice that they should be willing to pay for. But the reality is that today anyone can claim to be a travel advisor without demonstrating any knowledge or expertise. In your view, Chris, is that troubling? And if so, what is the other solution?
Well, first of all, I don't think getting certification will be a license to charge. I think it's just going to make you one of many. It's really not a problem in that area. And yes, we do have people that charge at different levels or don't charge. And that's really what the free market is all about. We don't need any government, or at least I don't need any government, to protect me from me. And I would hope you would feel the same way. So the reality of it is, you're going to get, and if you do it at the state level, I would challenge you to think how that might be implemented. Do you really believe that the states would implement this on a consistent across-the-board method? Now, I bet you everyone in this room can think about some items that are not enforced equally across all the states, so why would this be any different? So at the end of the day, this is not going to guarantee your income. It's not going to help you stand out anymore. It may help the entire industry stand out, but not you or your business or your agency individually.
Thank you, Chris. So it sounds like you believe that self-regulation and perhaps the free market will help to address these concerns. Rebuttal time for you, Eric.
Thank you. Chris, you already said that it would help some of the industry stand out. Well, that would be advantageous for all of us. This is a situation that the better the professionalism of the entire industry, the better the professionalism for the individual. I don't know about you, but I'm sure glad that my CPA, my lawyer, and even my doctor has a certain amount of education for the vocation in which they practice. Yes, we're an industry of professionals, and that's what ASTA has done, is tried to raise the level of professionalism and showing that we are advisors, but there is no standardization. This raising the bar of entry is not a bad thing. In fact, I think we'll draw more people to our industry when we show that we are professionals in the first place with a level of required of education and knowledge in order to practice what we do.
Eric, back to you. And this next question relates a little bit to what you talked about, the need for and the value of standardization. So one of the key considerations in connection with any discussion of mandated licensure in the industry is the question of who would do the licensing. Because very few professions are licensed at the federal level, generally limited to those where a single standard is required for public safety. Think of things like pilots, for example. State governments would almost certainly be the licensing body if this were to come to pass. Now, this works well for professions where the license holder generally serves clients in the same state where they reside. Real estate agents come to mind, for example. But that could potentially pose problems when one's clients could be located anywhere. Mm-hmm. wouldn't compliance with multiple state licensing requirements, some of which could even potentially conflict, create a nightmarish administrative burden on agencies, particularly small ones, with clients in more than just a handful of states?
Yes, it would if we waited for the states to actually be the ones to step up and start a program from scratch. If we instead, as an industry, start on our own and continue what ASTA has started with the ASTA Verified, if and when we finally get to a state level of certification and licensing, we would have created our own model for it in the first place. Who better to help establish what the requirements should be for our industry than the professionals that are already in the industry who understand it in the first place? It's just like what Jesse does on the Hill, trying to educate our politicians about the laws of the implication of the laws to our industry. If we have a better established industry-wide practices, then in the event of we finally get to licensing on a state level or even a national level, we've got the formation and foundation of such a program to begin with.
Okay, so you kind of envision that ASTA would be able to kind of guide the enabling or enacting legislation in a certain direction to ensure as best possible some degree of uniformity.
Correct, because right now ASTA is the voice of the industry representing everybody, and anybody that wants to be a part of ASTA may be, versus people choosing to be part of different host agencies, different consortia, but ASTA becomes the one unifying voice in Washington. It should be the unifying voice of the rest of the industry. It is the one that changed everything to being the advisor rather than an agent, and getting the support of the suppliers behind that would make it all work as well.
Interesting. Chris, what do you think about that? Is that realistic, or is that a little pie in the sky? What do you think?
Let me answer it with a rhetorical question. Has anybody in this room heard of a problem with a shiesty lawyer or a doctor or a CPA, these people that are licensed? So if you've never heard of that problem, he's 100% right. Okay? In this case, you've pointed it out, Peter, you talked about multi-states and how they're not going to line up. Eric himself has offices in multiple states. Mm-hmm. Imagine had those states not line up and what he is going to have to go through. This is an absolute case of be very careful what you ask for, because you just might get it.
Thank you, Chris. Next question is for you again. As we are all too aware, hardly a week goes by when there isn't a story in the news somewhere about a consumer that's been victimized by a travel scam. Given the unfortunate prevalence of fraudulent conduct perpetrated by unscrupulous people outside the industry, and regrettably sometimes from within as well, wouldn't mandated licensure go a long way toward addressing it? It seems that industry certification programs focusing on professionalism and ethics, such as ASTA's VTA, are indeed helpful, but given the voluntary nature and the modest enrollment rates, are far from a complete solution. And if not licensing, Chris, what, if anything, would you recommend to tackle the problem instead?
So once again, I would say to you, I certainly hear those stories once a week about lawyers, doctors, or accountants. I don't really hear it that much as it relates. Does it happen? Absolutely. Does certification stop that from happening? If you believe that, I have a bridge I want to sell each and every one of you. The reality of it is that this will lead to bureaucracy. It will lead to added costs. It will lead to making it more difficult to attract people to this business. Okay, and you amongst your peers and while we're all together as a single organization in ASTA, we're also competitors. And at the same time, I want to be able to differentiate myself from my competitor. And if I can do that, and that's clearly why, in my case, I got my CTC and CTIE, is I wanted to be different and stand out. I didn't want to be one of thousands. I wanted to be one of few. And that's the reality. And that's why the VTA program is really critical. It really sends a very strong message that I'm different than the person down the street. And you should use me and you should market it as that because that helps you stand out.
So you would say that that differentiation is what allows you to stand apart, whereas if everyone was licensed, then that would be eliminated. Is that your thought?
I don't want to say ASTA would be eliminated, but there's a lot less value in the VTA program as it relates to me standing out versus my competitor.
Thank you. Eric, your response.
Well, I certainly hope you stand out more than just by putting CTC behind your name. I hope that you stand out by the service you provide, the knowledge that you share with the consumer and the clientele, and that you specialize in your specific areas and not just simply put out the banner that says, I'm CTC. When it comes to also the regulations, we're already dealing with multi-state regulations. Look at the whole issue of third-party insurance and the extra challenges that go forward with that. Licensing doesn't necessarily mean adding more rules and regulations to the industry. It just means that everybody that participates in the industry understands the rules and regulations that we're already expected to adhere to in the first place, to have the knowledge of what we're supposed to be doing and not just simply getting some of it by willy-nilly information. Again, yes, it raises the bar of entry, but it's not about the members of ASTA. It's about the standardization, getting everybody to understand what are already the laws and the rules of the land.
Thank you, Eric, and I appreciate your thoughts regarding the third-party travel insurance. And I think that's kind of an interesting illustration because although we do have a large degree of uniformity now, that was a very long process, and it took many, many years to get to where we are today. But Eric, back to you with the next question. As owner of an agency based in Los Angeles, I'm sure you know that in connection with its seller of travel law, which again is only a registration requirement, California assesses a minimum annual franchise tax of $800 on every registered agency, even those that happen to be located outside the state of California. Now, if numerous states were to adopt the licensure requirement, it seems reasonable to me that many of them would impose similar fees to obtain and then maintain a license. In the aggregate, these ongoing costs could become substantial and would have to either be borne by the agencies, cutting into their profit margins, or be passed on to consumers in the form of higher professional service fees, neither of which seems desirable. So how would you respond to a critic who would argue that the cost of the licensing might well outweigh the benefits to the industry?
Well, first of all, you're going to a hypothetical of what states might do. Right now, the states could do anything they so desire with even registration. Yes, California has a seller of travel, but there's also required registration in Florida, Hawaii, and I think it's Washington as well. But meanwhile, nobody's required outside the state of California to do business with clients inside the state of California. That is your individual prerogative. So if it's not worth the $800 to you in the first place, then don't sell to somebody that lives in the state of California. I would certainly hope that you're getting a much greater value than $800. And yes, the individual states could still add or put on requirements whether we are licensed or not. California already does have, as you just said, the franchise tax law. That's just simply for anybody doing business in the state of California. Any other state might choose to propose that themselves as well, with or without licensing.
Thank you, Eric. Chris, what do you think about what you just heard? It seems that Eric is saying that, well, if you're not doing $800 worth of business in California, then just don't market your services to those in California. What do you think about that? What's your take?
Well, I love using an $800 number. So we're going to have everybody pay $800 to be equal to one another. Doesn't excite me. And we're going to have bureaucracy, and we're going to be in multiple states, so we'll have multiple versions of that. And the rules will be different as they already are. And again, it's not solving a problem. There will still be the same issues, just as there are with lawyers and doctors and accountants who get certified. If you think that doesn't go away, you would be wrong. But I would spend $800 on my business to help it stand out from the rest. And so, you know, if I had an agency location I'd have all of my people absolutely go for the VTA and spend the money because you know your competitors aren't doing that. And that should make you feel real good, and it should make your customers, it's the good housekeeping sign of approval. Now, if the good housekeeping sign of approval, everybody had it, would mean nothing. And it diminishes the value of the VTA program.
One quick comment, since I didn't use all my time originally.
Absolutely, Chris.
Eric, but thank you very much. Chris, we already have the $800 fee in California, so whether or not we propose or have licensing, it doesn't matter. The fee already exists, and other states could be imposing fees for doing business in their state with or without licensing, so it's irrelevant to the license argument.
Well, my response to that would be that you are 100% correct. That could happen to multiple states having seller of licensing fees. But let's go add on to it, okay, with a certification fee on top of it. And who doesn't think that would happen as well?
All right. Well, let's move on to the next aspect. This one, again, for you, Chris. Separate and apart from the concern regarding fraud that we discussed a few minutes ago, is ensuring that travel advisors are able to competently serve their clients. Now, it goes without saying that travel is increasingly complex, and the ability to provide reliable, accurate advice about suppliers, destinations, health and safety issues, documentation requirements, to name but a few, is critically important to maintaining consumer confidence. And consumers who have had a bad experience with an unqualified advisor are probably going to book direct the next time. And as such, they could well be lost forever. Given the reputational risks associated with advisors who are not qualified and what that means for the whole industry, if not licensing, how else should we strive to address this?
Reputation is really critical to each and one of us individually, and certainly to our company, our individual companies. Licensing doesn't enhance your reputation, but VTA does. It helps you, again, it helps to share with the consumer its commitment. Now, I don't know that they're going to go direct. You know, I don't know anybody. I came from an airline business. I have no desire to call an airline during a snowstorm, okay? And because my travel agent didn't do the right thing. I'm going to find an alternative solution that I can be served as a customer, and I think you will too. And the notion that they're going to go from me for not being a VTA to many parts of the industry that really don't enjoy great service reputations, I think is foolish. The reality of it is that if you have the reputation, you're going to win each and every time. It's not going to change the fraud. It's not going to change behavior. Remember, we talked about doctors, lawyers, and accountants, and this is supposed to be the mantra. Well, the reality of it is there's a lot of problems in that industry as well with all these protections. So what I see is I see a lot of cost. I see a lot of bureaucracy. And I see a lot of trouble trying to bring new people into the business. That's how I look at it.
Eric, Chris seems to be discounting the possibility of a scenario whereby a dissatisfied traveler decides he wants to circumvent the agency channel altogether the next time around. What do you think about that?
Well, as Chris said, there is no guarantees, but Chris, you already validated the value of the VTA program. And already said as a consumer you would want to work with an agent that is VTA certified in the first place. Well, the consumer doesn't necessarily know of the program per se or the information. So having at least a level of regulation or licensing would give an even more even playing field to everybody. And no, it does not eliminate some of the shysters, but if we make the bar to entry a little bit more professional and more requirements, it would be advantageous. I don't know about you, but when I travel to Europe and we go to many cities, I don't want just some schmo off the street walking me around the city and telling me that they are knowledgeable of sharing with me the destination. I know all of our river cruise partners in all of the appropriate cities, they use licensed tour guides to show us around the city. If they're using licensed tour guides in Europe and all, why wouldn't they want to be using licensed agencies to be selling their product in the first place?
Can I comment?
Chris, just take a few seconds to respond.
Are we saying we're not licensed today? We don't have an ARC appointment? That's a license. We don't have an IATA appointment? That's a license.
Not everybody's required to have those. You can sell without them.
If you're an agency and issuing tickets, you require...
Not everybody issues tickets anymore.
Oh, I understand that. And that, to your point, there are insurance things that we talked about that help you mitigate some of that in terms of claims against your clients. There are other training classes. And for those of you who don't issue airline tickets, and I realize there are many of you, but I would submit to you that you're already getting training to make yourself better and more professional to your clients. If you're not issuing tickets here, it's because you're still with ASTA and you're learning and you're gaining momentum to improve your business. That's kind of the whole point.
Thank you, Chris. Eric, back to you.
Oh, great.
One aspect of your position on the licensing issue that I think reasonable minds can agree on is that it would serve to deter individuals who lack the necessary commitment or expertise from entering the industry. And while that's definitely a good thing, a licensing mandate could also discourage others from entering the industry who have a genuine interest in becoming an advisor, but are not yet prepared to make the substantial time and financial investment required to study for and secure the license. I'm thinking, for example, of folks interested in transitioning to a career in travel, but due to existing work commitments, can only commit to do so on a part-time basis. In other words, wouldn't a licensing mandate create a substantial barrier to entry to the industry, one that would only exacerbate the shortage of qualified workers that we're already facing?
Not necessarily. Again, it all boils down to how we put together such a program. Licensing, as we talked about already in regards to third-party insurance, is based on an agency level, not on an individual level. We could be creating a program that says, as you come into the industry, you must be working for a licensed advisor or in association with a licensed advisor for a certain period of time while you earn your own licensing. Again, without a program in place to begin with, we don't know what it would even look like. And again, if we left it for government to create the program, then you're right, we'd be facing some nightmares and putting in farther bars to entry. But as an industry or as a whole, if we are the ones to create and start the whole process ourselves internally, we can help that guidance and create a program that does have a mentor that is licensed or working under an agency license in the first place. We've talked about licensing, but we've not said whether that's on the individual basis or on the company-wide basis. Right now, I could go out tomorrow, print up some business cards, hand it to my 24-year-old nephew and say, hey, you're a travel agent. Go tell everybody you're an expert. This would just create some form of education and standardization going forward. I think you guys are putting up barriers beyond what is being proposed on the fundamental concept of what a license is. The biggest argument I hear against it is the complication of putting it together. But again, if we create our own program and create the guidelines of a program, that sets the foundation in the future.
Thank you, Eric. So, Chris, it sounds like Eric is saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be a situation where somebody new to the industry couldn't operate as an agent under the agency's license. What do you think about that? Is there any merit to that as a possible workaround?
Well, first of all, it depends who's running it. If it is at the state level, think to yourself, what could go wrong with that? Okay? And this is where now you are no longer control. So now we're talking about self-governance. Okay? Self-governance, I might be able to buy into. But when I take it to the governmental or the state level or at any level, these are added fees. Jessica spends her whole life trying to do away with fees and taxes and burdensome situations that don't make sense. We're fighting with DOT about how soon we get our money back. You put this in the state government, you're going to have the next meeting with Jessica. We're going to be talking about this and what the state is forcing on us for to be certified. Not a situation I want to deal with, quite frankly.
Thank you. And our final question this morning goes to Chris. It's well known that a substantial majority of new entrants to our industry choose to work as independent contractors. However, to avoid exposure to a possible worker misclassification claim, the extent of training that an agency may require of or provide to a 1099 worker is limited as compared with a W-2 employee. Given this, wouldn't a state licensing requirement benefit agencies and the industry as a whole by ensuring that anyone engaged as an IC would already have demonstrated competence in the basics of selling travel? This, in other words, would minimize the legal risk associated with agencies providing training to 1099s.
Well, I'm going to use a Bruce McAdoo line that I'm not a lawyer, okay? But here's what I see. I don't see it being a problem today as we move forward. In most of the industry, we're told that are ICs. So again, it's in search of a problem that doesn't exist in any appreciable form or fashion. So I don't believe, from an IC standpoint, an IC has to protect their own reputation. The free market's going to shut them down. Social media will shut them down. There is so many policing mechanisms out there, not the least of which are the police departments and lawyers, okay, that can shut them down. So I don't have a lot of visibility in seeing where this is a huge problem. And I don't know that it's causing a lot of problem for you, and if it does, unless you're the offender, because it's your competitor. I don't think that your competitor is making you look bad, because, again, I can rationalize in my own mind that in every occupation there are good apples and bad apples, and there's not a preponderance of bad apples in this industry, and there's certainly not in this room, thanks to the ethics standards that ASTA has set.
Now, Eric, it seems that Chris is minimizing the risk of worker misclassification audits and lawsuits by aggressive attorneys. Now, while I would agree with Chris that it's not particularly common in our industry, how do you feel? Do you think that's an adequate response, that the market will simply take care of this?
No. And the reason being is, while there may be very few bad apples, as we've already said, those are not the members of ASTA in the first place. Those are not the members of reputable quality host agencies. But unfortunately, the bad apple gives the whole industry a black eye. When a consumer has a bad interaction with a travel advisor, it becomes a negative for the entire industry. We're trying to just simply raise the professionalism of the industry and trying to raise the quality of the services provided. Again, I don't think the issue is about people in this room or members of ASTA. It goes way beyond that. And as far as host agencies, when it comes to the 1099s, I think in a lot of ways they would welcome a minimum level of licensing for the very reason you stated. And that is they cannot mandate certain requirements in the first place. This would help them to be able to mandate, in order to be part of our company or work through our host agency, these are minimum requirements required in order to sell travel, period.
Thank you, Eric. Well, that concludes the question and answer portion of our debate. And now we'll turn to closing statements presented in alphabetical order. So we will begin with Mr. Dane.
Thank God it was that and not by agency name. Look, this is not a problem. This is taking a sledgehammer to a peanut at the end of the day. It's going to be burdensome ultimately. It's going to be a topic here at every summit from here on out, and what the government's doing and what we have to try and do and correct it. I just assume avoid all that grief. I would like to avoid the expense. I'd like to be able to train my own people. I'd like to go out and be able to get more people to help grow the travel pie bigger than what it is. And if you think about it, ICs didn't really exist to any appreciable extent, and certainly nowhere to where it does today. And yet the problems haven't exacerbated by having this classification. And yet we've attracted hundreds of thousands of people to this industry over the last decade. So the reality of it is I'm not I don't want somebody to tell me what to do. I do want to do things for my business that make my business better, that make me stand out, and where my clients have confidence in me. I don't think certification does any of that, and I don't think it does it for the industry, because even with the sellers of laws and all the other rules that exist today, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, you still have your bad apples, and this doesn't fix that.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Maryanov, 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Chris, to your comment about wanting to continue to train and educate, licensing doesn't stop you from training and educating them to the standards of which your company should operate. Licensing sets the minimum bar, not the maximum. So I certainly hope you would continue to educate, train, and take them to a higher level. It's not that we are in search of a solution to a non-existing problem. I just think that you've not addressed or had the experience with the problem in the first place. I think that raising us to a higher level of professionalism is good news for all of us. And I'll actually like to end with a quote, or a paraphrase quote from JFK. And my statement would be, we choose to do this and other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because the challenges, because the challenges is one that we are willing to accept. So no, licensing would not be an easy prospect in going forward, but I do believe that the time has come for our industry, long overdue, to raise the level of professionalism and to give everybody the tools they need to even understand the requirements that are already part of our industry that a lot of people don't even understand or know exist in the first place.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to thank our debaters for their thoughtful and passionate advocacy of their respective positions. Let's give them all a round of applause. Okay, you've now heard the arguments, both pro and con, on the licensing question. Now we want to hear from you, our valued premium members, and I have two specific questions for your consideration. As we've done in the past, you'll be voting using the red and green cards that were handed out. The first question I have for you is, where do you come down on licensing now? We realize you haven't had enough time, and we haven't really had the opportunity to talk about all of these things that we've raised here briefly in an exhaustive fashion. So we know it's based on a little bit of incomplete knowledge. But based on what you've just heard, which position makes the most sense for travel advisors and, by extension, ASTA to support? Now, I'm less concerned about who you think won the debate, but rather which course of action do you think makes the most sense in light of all of the competing priorities? If you believe a licensing mandate would be, on balance, a good thing for the industry, please show me the green side of your card. Alternatively, if you believe licensing is not in the best interest, please show me the red. Okay, it looks like we're fairly split. I may be a few more green than red, but...
I see a lot more green than red. I don't know what you're looking at, but I see a lot of green out there.
Clearly we do not have a consensus. That's what I will say. But now on for question number two, which I think is in some ways also quite interesting. And that is, regardless of where you now stand on the licensing question, did anything you heard today cause you to change your point of view? And again, if the answer to that question is yes, there were some things that were discussed that maybe caused you to think a little bit differently about this, show me the green side. Conversely, if your mind is not changed and it's exactly the same as before we started, then show me the red. Okay, it looks like the majority of people already had a pretty clear sense of where they stand on that, although there were a few people whose minds were changed. Well, I want to thank again all of you for your participation, and especially Eric and Chris. Looks like we just are out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over now to Mark to close us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.